Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. So glad you're joining us today because we are diving into something absolutely crucial. We're going to completely demystify the SASB Workforce Health and Safety Reporting Standard, specifically the one designed for the metals and mining industry. We're taking what is, honestly, a pretty heavy compliance document and turning it into a clear, actionable toolkit that you can actually use. So let's jump right in.
Now, it's no secret that the metals and mining sector operates in some seriously hazardous environments. We're talking heavy machinery, powered haulage, intense structural challenges, and really complex extraction processes. Because of this, tracking safety meticulously isn't just about ticking a box for regulators or filling out some corporate spreadsheet. It's a top operational priority because, at the end of the day, it is literally about protecting human lives and making sure every single person on your site gets home safely after their shift.
But that brings us to a massive hurdle, right? How do we standardize all this safety tracking across such a giant global industry? Think about it. If a mining operation in Australia tracks their safety metrics completely differently than a refinery in Canada, how do we even know where we stand? How can investors, operators, or regulators possibly compare apples to apples? Well, the answer lies in adopting a universal mathematical language for safety.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the stakes of mine safety. Second, defining the core metrics. Third, the 200,000-hour formula. Fourth, who counts in the data. And finally, tracking health and safety training. We're going to move quickly from the core concepts straight into the actual math.
So starting off with Section 1, the stakes of mine safety, the high cost of hazardous conditions.
You might be wondering, why is standardizing these metrics the very first step to improving safety? Well, it all comes back to safety culture, which is an entity's ability to protect employee health, prevent accidents, mitigate costs, and reduce operational downtime. See, safety and operational success are completely tied together. A poor health and safety record doesn't just result in tragic human consequences, it directly leads to massive fines, serious regulatory penalties, and just crushing compliance costs. And that's not even mentioning the financial hit from operational downtime when an incident literally shuts a site down. You know the old saying, you can't manage what you don't measure, and you definitely can't improve it.
Moving right along into Section 2, defining the core metrics. What exactly are we tracking here?
Let's get really specific about what we're required to count before we dive into the math. The source material we're looking at is the SASB standard EMM 320A.1. As you can see, this framework requires organizations to report on a very precise set of numbers, all incidence rates, fatality rates, and near-miss frequency rates. And, as we'll get into in a minute, you actually need to calculate these rates for both your direct employees and your contract employees.
Okay, so what actually goes into that all-incidence bucket? We're talking about recordable incidents. Obviously, this includes fatalities, as well as non-fatal days lost cases, meaning an injury that causes a worker to lose one or more days of scheduled work or puts them on restricted duty. But it also includes no days lost cases, provided they require medical treatment beyond just standard first aid. And hey, that's a really vital distinction to make. Basic first aid, like slapping a bandage on a minor scrape, doesn't usually count as a formal medical treatment case. The incident really has to cross that specific threshold of severity to be recorded.
Then we have the near miss. A near miss is an unplanned or uncontrolled event that didn't actually result in an injury or damage, but had the clear potential to do so under slightly different circumstances. So why track something that almost happened? Because your near-miss frequency rate, or NMFR, is basically your ultimate leading indicator. It's your early warning system. By tracking near misses, you're identifying those catastrophic risks and fixing them before a disaster actually strikes.
All right, Section 3, the 200,000-hour formula. This is the math behind the meaning.
Now that we know exactly what incidents to count, how do we calculate the actual rates? Well, it all comes down to this number right here, 200,000. This is the absolute bedrock of the industry standard formula for calculating incidence rates. But I promise you, this isn't just some random multiplier someone pulled out of thin air for convenience.
Let's look at exactly where that 200,000 comes from. It actually represents a standard baseline workforce. Think about it like this. Step 1, take a typical team of 100 full-time workers. Step 2, have them work a standard 40-hour week. And step 3, multiply that by 50 weeks per year, which simply accounts for a couple of weeks of standard time off. 100 times 40 times 50 gives you exactly 200,000 hours. So when you calculate a rate using this base, you're basically asking, hey, if I had a perfectly standard 100-person team working for a full year, how many incidents would they experience? It creates this perfectly level playing field for comparison, whether your company has 50 employees or 50,000.
And here is the master formula. You take your statistic count, so that's your total recordable incidents, your fatalities, or your near misses. You multiply that count by $200,000. Then you divide that result by the total number of actual hours worked by all employees during that reporting year. The big takeaway here is that you're going to run this exact same formula 3 different times to get your 3 key metrics, your all-incidence rate, your fatality rate, and your near-miss frequency rate.
Which brings us to Section 4, Who Counts in the Data? Establishing your reporting boundaries. Now that you've got the formula down, you have to make absolutely sure you're plugging the correct populations into it. If your workforce boundaries are off, your math is going to be completely invalid. And the SASB standard is super strict about this. You cannot just lump everyone together. You have to run these rate formulas separately for 2 very distinct groups. First, your direct employees. These are folks directly on your payroll. It doesn't matter if they are full-time, part-time, seasonal, or hourly. If they're on your payroll, they go here. You contrast that with contract employees. These are individuals who are not on your payroll, but whom your entity actively supervises and manages. Think independent contractors or people brought in through a temp agency. So to be clear, you calculate the incidence, fatality, and near-miss rates for your direct employees, and then you do the whole process all over again for your contract employees.
Also, we need to clarify what makes an incident truly work-related. Establishing these boundaries is absolutely critical for pristine data. First, it has to be a brand new case, not just a medical update on an old injury from a previous year. Second, it has to happen in the work environment. And keep in mind, this isn't just the physical mine site. It includes the specific equipment and materials the employee is using. And finally, yes, it does include work-related travel, as long as the employee was engaged in work activities for the employer at the time. Getting these boundaries right is essential.
Moving to our final section, Section 5, Tracking Health and Safety Training, Preparing the Workforce.
We've spent a lot of time talking about how to track things when they go wrong, or when they almost go wrong. But this framework also requires you to track the proactive steps you take to keep your people safe in the first place. So here is the final formula you need, and thankfully it's a lot simpler. To find the average hours of health, safety, and emergency response training, you just take the total qualifying training hours provided by the entity and divide it by the total number of employees. And remember, just like before, you calculate this separately for your direct employee bucket and your contract employee bucket. This basically tracks your company's proactive investment of time and safety per individual worker.
But what actually counts as qualifying training? Well, it needs to be directly relevant to the specific hazards we talked about at the very beginning of this explainer. This includes training on general occupational risks, training tailored to the specific hazards a worker is reasonably likely to face, and emergency preparedness and response drills. So just passing out a generic health and wellness pamphlet? Yeah, that doesn't count. We're talking about actionable, hands-on, hazard-mitigating education.
Which leaves us with this final thought. You now know the exact core metrics. You understand the math behind the 200,000-hour formula. You know how to correctly categorize your workforce and draw those precise reporting boundaries. But as you master the actual math of compliance, I really want to challenge you. How is your organization actively building a culture of safety that goes way beyond just the numbers? Because, at the end of the day, an all-incidence rate isn't just a decimal point on some sustainability report. It represents real human lives, their families, and the true operational integrity of your sites. So use these standardized metrics not just to pass an audit, but to spark the kind of change that fundamentally improves human safety. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.